slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no.
Welcome to a new GSD series called Overrated. If you have Hakeem Olajuwon as your GOAT, you might want to stay here and pay attention. If you have him as the best center, please check out the GOAT series videos linked here of Wilt and Kareem first. And if you even have him as the best of his era, stay tuned. This video's for you. My idea is to paint this picture comparing Hakeem to the top centers with an emphasis on head-to-head play, followed by a comparison of numbers, accolades, winning, and a final thoughts and conclusion section. I'm going to start with a quick comparison to centers before Hakeem played, before we get into some more detailed comparisons of his peers. First, let's start with a guy like Bill Russell. Bill is one of the only elite centers that doesn't match up with Hakeem offensively, even when taking into account Bill's era, the lack of efficiency, and foul calls. Despite this, Bill was the better playmaker, passer, and he beats Hakeem in his strong suit of defense, as well as counting numbers in blocks, rebounds, and steals. I personally have Hakeem ahead of Bill. However, Bill also dominates him in impact, measured by difference when they play versus when they don't, winning percentage by a huge margin of 71.7% for Bill and 59.1% for Hakeem. Bill also has the edge, obviously, with 11 titles to 2, and obviously MVPs at 5-1. Even though I would agree Hakeem might have a case for his one, well, I think most of the Bills were actually fraudulent. Next up is Wilt Chamberlain. I got 2 good videos on Wilt here, so I'm not going to go into depth. But he literally has Hakeem beat everywhere, in most of the spots by a ridiculous margin. Wilt was the far superior offensive and defensive player. He had a much stronger prime. He was more efficient. He also dominated his peers much more, with more NBA first teams and MVPs. They both only won 2 titles, but Wilt went to more finals. He also had a higher winning percentage, and he did all this in less time against better competition. And when I say that, I'm talking about the teams they played. Of course, Wilt lost a lot to dynasty Boston teams. This was pre-salary cap, pre-free agency, pre-a lot of this stuff. So if you look at Boston compared to the teams of their time, it was a very loaded team. Wilt also led the league in points, assists, rebounds, field goal percentage. He would have led in blocks many times if that was a counting stat. Whereas compared to Hakeem, he led the league in blocks 3 times, in rebounds twice. So I'm really curious if anyone has an argument of Hakeem being better than Wilt. Go ahead and drop that in the comment section. And while I could keep going and throwing out guys like Bellamy, McAdoo, Walton, let's just get to another slam dunk in my opinion. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Now, despite Kareem leading in most of the career numbers and all the advanced, if you compare their best 3, 5, 7, or even 10-year stretch, it's much less close. And before someone who watched neither says, who was it against? Hakeem himself. While their head-to-head numbers look similar, if you look at their first 2 years of matchups, which is really the closest to fair, Kareem dominated the games and got the big majority of the wins. This is where people will say, well, Hakeem was young. Let's think about that though. Who's closer to their prime numbers? Hakeem at 22, 23, 24, or Kareem at 37, 38, 39, especially when you consider Kareem's numbers fall off a wall at 39, and they're already greatly declined from just a few years prior. Yes, Hakeem got the better in the 86 playoffs of the way past Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But we can also look at this as a comparison season for season. Like, take their first 3 seasons, for instance. Or you could go up and down the line pretty much any season, 4th to 4th season, 5th to 5th season, same age. Either way, pretty much any season or year you pick, Kareem has the edge. Comparison to peers, accolades, winning, and impact are all easy sweeps for Kareem as well. Again, let's look at what Hakeem did at 39 before we judge too harshly about what Hakeem did to Kareem at 39. Probably the best peer comparison to Hakeem is Patrick Ewing based on career overlap. Now, I'm not going to try to make a case for Patrick Ewing over Hakeem because it really doesn't exist. However, his offensive numbers are closest to Hakeem. They also have a similar win percentage, and they're one of 3 people we'll mention that had win percentages under 60%. The rest of these guys are well above that. You could also argue that Ewing's best year, 89-90, was better than any Hakeem year, easily on the offensive side anyhow. And Patrick was his top competition in the late 80s and early 90s when Hakeem won most of his first team spots where Moses and Kareem were already done and Shaq and David Robinson haven't arrived on scene yet. So we know both Pat and old man Kareem beat him for first team center in the 80s. Let's talk about a third guy that got first team center during the 80s in Kareem's time, Moses Malone. Now, we will concede the edge to Hakeem in career numbers, but when you do a 5-year prime comparison, he definitely has a huge edge in scoring and rebounds at a minimum, especially on the offensive side. Now, does that gap make up for the edge Hakeem had on defense compared to Moses Malone? I don't know. If we compare just their primes, his best teams were better. Moses won 3 MVPs to Hakeem's 1, and also had a couple-year run where you could argue he was best in the league. Something it's questionable, and we can at least say Hakeem never clearly did. I wouldn't argue with you if you had Hakeem ahead, though, but this is where we get to the sticking point, Shaquille O'Neal. Shaq has a slight edge again in career numbers, especially in advanced metrics, but the domination really widens when you just focus into their prime years. Shaq, although Hakeem is considered the better defender, Shaq in his prime actually defended bigger centers better than Hakeem did. He also had the head-to-head dominance. I'm not going to overrate Hakeem because of one playoff run where he did beat Robinson and Shaq. But I think that's where, between that and the highlights, so many people elevate Hakeem. Now, people act like Shaq got killed in that finals series. If anything, he probably should have demanded the ball more. Obviously, Hakeem was the best player on the floor, but Shaq played pretty darn good as well. I mean, he was much more efficient, and his numbers weren't too far behind. And obviously, we know once Shaq hit his prime and Hakeem was out of his, this wasn't even a close matchup. Shaq had more first-team All-NBA selections as well. He had more titles, a much better winning percentage, and obviously Shaq should have won more than one MVP. This video linked here where I think Shaq ranks where he should have for MVPs. The last peer comparison we'll make to Hakeem Olajuwon is David Robinson. Now, it's funny because Robinson gets pushed way down these lists. Yet he's much closer to Hakeem than Hakeem is to Shaq, in my opinion, and I think the evidence will show that as well. Their career numbers are about a wash, but again, Robinson had the better peak. And you can make the argument he should have won the MVP the year Hakeem won it, as well as the year he did win MVP. Robinson also won 68.2% of his games, almost 10% more. There was also a huge gap comparing the team winning percentage when you look at with versus without the player on the floor, showing Robinson's impact. Now we know Robinson was never the same after he broke his foot and he was already dealing with a bad back in 96-97, which, as we mentioned, drags down his career numbers and how he's viewed. However, Robinson had a pretty good run, making first team All-NBA in 90-91, 91-92, 94-95, and 95-96. The two titles is where most people kind of crown Hakeem over Robinson, because you had the Jordan three-peat on either side, and it made it look like Hakeem was the next guy, when in reality at that time frame, maybe after he won the two titles for a small bit, but no one really considered Hakeem that guy, and he's doing a better living off of a playoff run than Dwayne Wade. Now let's look at their head-to-head matchup, because we already know Hakeem won the one playoff series. But if we look in the regular season where there's a lot more sample size, Robinson is 30-12 against Hakeem. And I can't understate enough how dominant Hakeem's playoff run was. So now that we covered some of the centers that Hakeem played in his prime, let's go ahead and look at least one guy after his prime. Now there's a lot of guys we could list in here, but the one I want to put in there, because I know people will say it's crazy, but if you think about it, people always kind of underrate what they're watching in the moment. And Nikola Jokic, he might not be there yet, but clearly his offensive powers and his time on top of the league has already surpassed Hakeem Olajuwon. So no one's going to confuse Jokic's defense for Hakeem's, but we know he can use his size to make it difficult for other bigs. And while I'll agree because of the change of the game, maybe he doesn't have the same center competition in the post, he also have to give him credit for having the more difficult job of having to be able to defend in space a lot more than Hakeem had to do in his era. Jokic has been the best player in the NBA for about 4 or 5 years now. He already has one title so far, and he has a 64.3 winning percentage, which is pretty good and substantially better than Hakeem. His prime offensive numbers more than make up any defensive gap. Now, just to make this interesting, I want to add this one portion to the end of the video where we take the best 7-year stretch of 6 of these guys' primes. Now, the only player that's really hurt by taking a 7-year stretch is the Joker, because he's only had about 4.5 years where he's dominated. Remember, this guy started as a bench player and had a different road than most of these other guys to stardom. Yeah, his offense still stacks up well. Now, looking at the stats and accolades, the only thing Hakeem leads is blocks, steals, and Defensive Player of the Year selections, which honestly could all be Wilt if those numbers were available. Wilt clearly has points and rebounds by a large margin. He's also tied with Kareem and Shaq for the most first-team NBA selections during their 7-year stretch, and he's tied with Shaq and Robinson for all NBA general, despite there not being a third team when he played. Nikola clearly has the assist and efficiency numbers. Robinson had the most games in his prime, as well as leading in value over replacement. Now notice how many things Hakeem trails. In points per game, he's only behind Nikola, but that's probably going to change over the years. Assist, he's tied for last. Field goal percentage in EFG, again he's last. He's got the lowest three-point percentage of any of the players that are shooting threes or had a three-point line, as well as in BPM. and many of the other advanced numbers. And win percentage, he's behind all these guys by a lot. Now, does good defense and getting multiple accolades during 1 year where you have a great playoff run beat all of that? You tell me below in the comments below, and I'd love to get some of these comments where people see it differently so we can kind of break out more of the evidence as opposed to just saying Hakeem's a top center, because I definitely can't see him in the top 3. That's all I got. If you enjoyed the content, please hit the like button. I always respond to the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.